Welcome to the first Zonta Says Now Australian think tank for the new biennium. I hope you enjoyed the Olympic Games and are now raring to go with Zonta Says Now. Before we begin, I'd like to cover some housekeeping. Please share your location in the chat line and use the chat line to ask questions and make comments. Please keep your microphone on mute, especially during presentations. And in the Q&A, please ask short, succinct questions and use welcoming and inclusive language. Thank you. As you can see, we have quite a programme today, so let's get moving. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's presentation team. I'm from the Zonta Club of Perth in Western Australia, and my name is Carol Theobald. Christine Trenorden is from the Zonta Club of Fleurieu Peninsula in South Australia. Sue Lees and Sandra Burns are from the Zonta Club of Melbourne on Yarra in Victoria. Cheryl Scott is from the Zonta Club of Macarthur in New South Wales, and Sandra McLean is from the Zonta Club of Brisbane in Queensland. So either in front of the screen or behind it, we're all working together to bring this meeting to you today. Firstly, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in all the places that we meet from today, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We usually acknowledge a female First Nations leader at the start of each meeting. Today, we'd like to acknowledge Dr. Auntie McRose, a climate justice advocate from the Torres Strait Islands. At a recent presentation to the Australia Institute, she described how the impacts of climate change are destroying the Sabai and Boigu Islands. She says, "We have to hunt further and further. We cannot garden anymore. Our resting places of our loved ones are washing out. There's catastrophe on the islands. Scientists are saying that it could be around 2038 that these two islands will be underwater." Dr. Auntie McRose advocates for the class action being brought by Uncle Pabai and Uncle Paul. They argue that climate change is causing severe and lasting harm to their communities, and by failing to prevent climate change, the Australian government has unlawfully breached its duty of care. They're seeking an order from the court requiring the government to prevent this harm to their communities by cutting greenhouse gas emissions. This is happening here in Australia. Our sisters and brothers are losing their ancestral lands to climate change. I'll now pass you on to Christine to explain why Zonta Says Now to gender equal climate action.
Thanks, Carol. We use this train to show why Zonta Says Now to gender equal climate action. This train was built during the Industrial Revolution, at a time when humans started to put more carbon pollution into the atmosphere, where it is accumulating, forming a blanket around the planet and causing global heating and associated extreme weather events. Extreme heat, droughts, fires, floods, and storms trigger social disruption, causing millions of people to lose their livelihoods and homes. This social disruption magnifies any existing inequality, including gender inequality. Zonta Says Now stops the train by advocating for governments to meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement and closing the gender gaps in leadership, education, economic opportunity, health and safety. Life for women and girls at the end of the train is hard. Because of the drought, 9-year-old Dabor in Sudan has to walk further each day to collect water and has no time to go to school. And in Mozambique, Ayan's family lost everything in the floods, and she's being sold into marriage. In Canada, wildfire smoke triggered young Claire's asthma. Her mother, Judith, is worried she will lose her casual job as she's had to take time off work to look after Claire. And in Australia, Maria is 79. She has a heart condition that is made worse in extreme heat. She has no air conditioning and walks to the local library each day to sit in the cool. She's worried about how she will physically survive the summer. Floods caused problem for Yvonne. Her home was destroyed. She had no insurance and has been living in temporary accommodation for over 2 years with no savings to get a permanent home. A lifetime of lower pay makes it harder for women to bounce back after a disaster. The number of women and girls living at the end of the train is increasing due to climate change. For example, studies have found that a 1 degree Celsius rise in average temperature is associated with a 6% rise in violence against women. A 10% increase or decrease in average rainfall is associated with a 1% rise in child marriage. This means that a 40% increase in rainfall equates to a 4% rise in child marriage. Social disruption is a huge issue when it comes to widening gender gaps. In 2022, there were over 36 million climate refugees. And if we don't act now, this could rise to over 1 billion people by 2050. Sadly, 1 in 5 women who are refugees or displaced has experienced sexual violence. This is why Zonta Says Now seeks climate justice for women and girls so they can prevent, prepare for, respond to and recover from the impacts of climate change on the same basis as men. I encourage you to learn more about Zonta's 3 international service projects for this biennium. We are entering the 3rd phase of our signature project with the UNFPA to end child marriage in 12 countries. Our Climate Empower project with the UNFPA aims to prevent climate-induced gender-based violence in Madagascar, Mozambique, and South Sudan, 3 countries particularly affected by climate-induced gender-based violence. The LAHA project extends UNICEF's virtual safe space from 6 to 12 countries. LAHA enables women and girls to safely access information and services online about gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health. So those are the 3 international service projects for this current biennium. So now let's hear from our first speaker. Please remember to put your questions in the chat line as we'll have a Q&A session at the end of each of the presentations. I'll now call on Sue Lees from the Zonta Club of Melbourne on Yarra to introduce our first speaker. Over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Christine. Alana Mountain from Victoria is the recipient of the Zonta Club of Melbourne on Yarra's 2023 Women Taking Climate Action Award. And in 2024, that will actually become now a District 23 award, and we'll talk more about that later. Alana, for over 10 years, has worked to protect the beautiful flora and fauna of the Central Highlands of Victoria. He has encouraged women to become tree climbers, an activity that was actually largely considered male, and doing so supported the collection of data to show the effects of logging on native wildlife, and particularly the engendered greater glider. These findings were then used in a legal case that proved the logging industry had not been taking the necessary studies and steps to protect the greater glider, and led ultimately to the end of the logging of native forests in Victoria, really a triumph. Yeah. And her efforts have helped to protect the densest carbon-rich plant on Earth, the mountain ash. So we very much welcome to Alana today, and I'm really looking forward to catching up with you, Alana. So over to you.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm just going to share my screen.
All yours, Alana.
No worries. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. Now I'm just going to minimize the little thing. All right, well, thanks for that lovely introduction, Suzanne, and also really big thank you to Zonta and all the work that you do. And yeah, thank you so much for acknowledging what I do and yeah, presenting me with the award. It was really special to be honored in that way. And yeah, it's been a big part of my life, protecting forests. And maybe today I can share a little bit about what that has looked like. So you can see here is an image of some people holding up a banner in front of a tripod. So part of my work has consisted of a lot of this in the past, a lot of physically getting in the way of the destruction. But this was also something that was quite tactical, where we would select areas that were high conservation value, survey them, and we would detect threatened species that are meant to be protected under the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. And this was quite effective. We kicked the machines out of a lot of different areas across Victoria through holding off the logging, surveying, and then putting forward scientific reports to the government department, DECA, where they had to, yeah, basically put those buffers around the detected animals and stop the logging. So that's, yeah, been a really big part of my life. Just trying to click next. But before I begin, I want to just acknowledge country and just acknowledge all the different country that we have across Victoria. And the forests that I've predominantly been working in have been on Dja Dja Wurrung country, Wurundjeri, Tangarang, Gunai Kurnai, Yatmathang, and Doodarowa. So all the way from the west, all the way to the east of Victoria. A little bit about me. So my background is in environmental science. I've worked for many different NGOs over the years, from the Wilderness Society to the Australian Youth Climate Coalition when I was actually considered a youth back then. Friends of the Earth Melbourne I still work for now, and I worked for the Victorian Forest Alliance. And all up, I've been a forest campaigner for roughly over 10 years. And I'm only 33, so it's about a third of my life, which is pretty wild to think about. I've also worked for Melbourne Water, and I've done soil studies in the Central Highlands, as well as I've even lived overseas in the Amazon and studied rainforests over there. So had a pretty full life so far as a young woman in conservation, and I feel really lucky to have had so many different experiences and seen the kinds of things that I've seen. This is a photo of me wading in water, capturing macroinvertebrates. But I want to just come back to the logging, because that's why I'm really here today, is to share about my work regarding stopping clearfell logging in Victoria. And this scene is literally what changed the course of my life. So when I was 20-ish, I went out to areas in the Central Highlands, and I saw vast areas of clearfell, and it just really switched something on inside of me. It was almost this primal response that was activated, and I just felt really confronted by this scene, and like I just instantly knew it was so wrong and it was so unjust, and that something had to be done about it. So I dedicated a lot of the next few years of my life to training and upskilling and joining different groups. And one of them was Forest Conservation Victoria. And yeah, when I first started in the direct action scene, as Suzanne mentioned, it was a very male-dominated scene, and the people who were always putting the tree sits up in the trees were men, and I felt that there was this imbalance between the men and the women, or even, you know, gender diverse folk, that it was always a man's job and that there wasn't a lot of room for women. And over the years, I kind of just made more friends that were women who were really interested in learning how to do this, and started, yeah, encouraging others to come along to secret climb trainings where we'd train up along the side of the Yarra River um, in the bush. And we went to climb schools in different states, which I won't say where they are because I've got to keep that a secret. But yeah, over time, it just kind of built this alliance with other women. And I really saw that power dynamic flip. And all of a sudden, it was the women who were always climbing up into the trees and rigging. And there was just a lot more space for women in this, on this scene, I guess. There's a photo of me up a really big blue gum in Tassie. You can see like the height of that tree right there next to me. I'm probably about 30 meters up in the air there, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, this is the kind of thing that we're training to do. And it was a really important piece of winning the campaign, I believe. I think direct action highlights to the broader public, you know, what places are at risk. And it also gives us that opportunity to hold off the logging while we investigate other avenues such as litigation, or yeah, just detecting these species and putting forward scientific reports and using the system. But it is a really fundamental aspect of protecting the environment. This is me standing on a huge grandmother tree, as I call it. And yeah, it's just devastating, this kind of loss. Like, that tree has seen so many generations of life and was here well before, you know, white man stepped on Australia, and it has ancient songlines, and it's just truly a loss to culture, to biodiversity, to spirit. But yeah, this is why we do what we do. This is me and some of my friends who are also awesome forest defenders. And we're there celebrating after a win with a really big mountain ash around Talangi. So something else that I've been involved in is, yeah, the surveying, and primarily that was with wildlife of the Central Highlands. And that's me with my good friend Hayley, who we were at this market talking about, yeah, gliders and Leadbeater's possum, and trying to raise money for this huge court case that we ran for over 4 years. So another part of my work has been procuring evidence for court cases and raising a lot of money to run community-led court cases to hold Vic Forests, the government-owned, well, not anymore, they don't exist, but I'll come up to that soon, the once Victorian-owned logging agency. I've also been involved in a lot of community engagement, so taking people out into the forest, talking to them about what's happening, and trying to empower others to become leaders in this space and to get involved, because it takes many to create change. And yeah, this was a fundamental part of creating that cultural shift. It was getting people out into the forest to see what's happening. I was also involved in the last state election campaign, which was absolutely massive. Through my work at the Victorian Forest Alliance, we targeted marginal electorates, and we made forests a key election issue. And we went to train stations, and you could see some of my volunteers there on the left holding up these flyers that we would hand out to folk, sharing with people where the major parties sat with their forest conservation policy. And in Northcote, we rattled, that Greek woman, what's her name? My brain's a bit fried right now. I can't remember her name. Maybe one of you remember. But she comes from a very strong political family, and She's the Labor member, Kat Theophanous, that's it. And she was quite rattled, and they started putting out like these counter leaflets, and it was really quite a battle in that area. And yeah, it was very interesting to see the reaction, and yeah, just how much noise we created through this. This is up in the high country. So currently my work with Friends of the Earth Melbourne is focused on the Vic Alps. I've actually taken a bit of a step back from the Central Highlands because we've gone through this engagement process surrounding what the future management will look like, and we've submitted our perspective on what should happen, and now it's kind of in the hands of, you know, the government and also First Nations to kind of decide what that would look like. So I've kind of pivoted to putting more of my attention into the Vic Alps because snow gums are in decline, and the area is under threat of consequential fires. So anyway, this is a group that I've led up into the mountains with my colleague Cam Walker to take a look at dieback, and yeah, just to understand the impacts at a landscape level, what climate change is doing. And here's a really nice photo I thought I'd chuck in of me standing on the top of Mount Wills. And you can just see, you know, the high country and the swimming mountains that expand before your eyes to the horizon. It's really quite lovely around here. And I'm actually in Dinner Plain right now, so I can say I'm in Dinner Plain near Mount Wills. But I just want to go back to this, the citizen science. So this is an ongoing part of my work. I think citizen science is incredibly important in this time where, you know, the system isn't really actively trying to protect the environment. We know that. And it's actually, unfortunately, up to everyday people like ourselves to get out there and be the eyes on the ground, and to keep the government and other organizations with not the best interests, you know, keep them accountable and transparent around what it is that they're doing. And citizen science has been a really good tool in my activist belt. This is a photo of us going out looking for greater gliders, which were the endangered species that were subject of the court case that we were running. And here's the greater glider for you. It's a very, very cute, fluffy, very unique animal that we're lucky to have. And they do range up to northern New South Wales. However, there is a difference between the ones that you find in New South Wales and the ones you find in Victoria. We've got the southern greater glider. But they're this incredible animal that needs many dens and many old hollow-bearing trees for habitat. And they're also this species that if you protect them, they protect, you know, by default, many other species. So we often see with nature protection, you know, the koala is the champion kind of animal, or the dolphins, or, you know, it's always the cute things or the things that we all love. But when we're working to protect the glider or the koala, we're also working to protect the insects and the spiders and the and the snakes and all these other things that make up the ecosystem. And the greater glider's home is, you know, these old trees with massive hollows, and those hollows take over 100 years to fully form. So that's kind of what's at stake here when we've been clear felling. It's where we're setting back the clock, and we're losing these hollow-bearing trees that are critical habitat, and that's why these species have been in steep decline. But in good news, this is me in the middle with my very ecstatic friendship group of dedicated forest campaigners and lawyers. And this was with Kinglake Friends of the Forest. And this was after we won the appeal against Vic Forests. And basically we proved that Vic Forest was not protecting the greater glider, that they were not surveying the species adequately, and that they were jeopardizing the future of the animal. And yeah, it was a very exciting moment. You know, it's really hard to take on a government funded industry with just a bottomless pit of money. Like the government would bankroll every single you know, point of the litigation process, whereas we're a community group having to constantly find $20,000 for an expert witness, or $10,000 for that bit of paperwork that needs to be submitted by Monday. Like, it's a really wild journey to take an industry to court. So we were really, really happy. And most of all, we were really happy for the gliders. Like, I remember that night I went home, and for the first night in years, I actually felt like I could go to sleep knowing that the gliders would be happy in their trees. I know that sounds really silly, but that's just how I felt. But yeah. So the result of that case, in a nutshell, was basically the judge ordered the timber industry to stop logging until they improved their survey methods. But because Vic Forests were not going to do that, said they could not do that, and basically tried to overturn the judgment of the judge and failed to do so, the ruling stood, and Vic Forest had nowhere to go, and the government had nowhere to go. So this was the announcement on May 23 of last year. And basically they said that native forestry has been hit with increasingly severe bushfires, prolonged legal action, and court decisions. There are no alternative timber supply sources available which can offset the current disruptions to supply to Victorian mills. And there are no options for regulatory reform, which can prevent further legal injunctions continuing to disrupt timber harvesting operations. So that last part there that I've highlighted, there are no options for regulatory reform, was an incredible thing to achieve, because the government historically has changed the law to suit the timber industry, to basically get rid of court action against them. And this time there was no avenue. They could not change the law. The law was that Vic Forests needed to change their survey methods. So basically, the government was like, that's it. We have to shut down the timber industry. And also, it had cost so many millions of dollars in court litigation fees, because obviously when you lose a case, you have to pay the winning party. And just to put that into context, the years before court litigation started, Vic Forest was already losing $26 million of taxpayers' money, roughly, every single year. And that's just through their operational loss. Then we started litigating, and it was case after case after case. The next year, their total net loss was $56 million. And so we just hit them in every single, spot. We hit them with their social license, we hit them in the courts, and we hit them in the pocket. So yeah, that was a really incredible announcement. And as of June 2024, this year, Vic Forest no longer exists, which is just a most incredible outcome. To actually experience such a significant win in my young life, I feel really honored to be a part of that moment. I've put this in because I've been involved in a lot of media stories, and this woman I took out from the ABC to the forests, she'd never seen Clearfell before, and she was doing this story on the court cases and what we were doing. And this is what I shared with her, that going out there and detecting these species and seeing the forests is really empowering. But at the same time, it's absolutely heart-wrenching because you get to see these beautiful, special, incredible parts of the forest, but then sometimes you return a week later and it's no longer there. And it's like this constant cycle of loss and processing the grief that you feel around the climate and biodiversity loss. And I felt good that I could kind of communicate that and get that message out there about the real impact it has on people and our connection to the environment. And I wanted to kind of finish up on something a bit positive. So in this work, it's obviously it's really difficult to stay on the front foot and to stay positive and to keep showing up at the capacity that myself and so many others do, because you're in a war. You're in a war trying to end destructive practices that are ruining the planet, which is jeopardizing our future climate safety. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, if any of you know who she is just the most profound writer, and I find her outlook, her philosophical perspective on our connection to life and our deep relationship to the world around us to be really comforting. And I just really loved this quote from her about choosing joy over despair and just remembering that it is the earth that gives you, life every day, and that because of that, we need to return the gift. And that's kind of what underpins my work. It's just remembering that the earth is what sustains me and life. And if I don't find a way to use my privilege to give back, then we could lose that. But even in amongst all the destruction, the decay, there is still beauty. And it is that cycle of, life and death that gives life. So yeah, that's kind of how I show up in the world around this. So what's next? I've got this really annoying Zoom thing covering all of this text. So yeah, currently I'm still working for Friends of the Earth Melbourne, and I'm predominantly focused on the Vic Alps campaign and around snow gum decline, which involves, citizen science and community organizing and getting people up here to care and share. The next thing that I'm awaiting currently, and that will influence kind of next moves, is the announcement of how Victoria's forests will be managed into the future. So post the end of Vic Forests, 1.8 million hectares of state forest across Victoria is under review for new management, which is huge. It's the biggest, land reform that is going to take place. So it's a really important time for people to, be proactive in speaking up for their local areas of forest and, just making sure that whatever happens, that this decision to shut down Vic Forests and the timber industry in the capacity that we've experienced it for so long isn't able to return with a change of government. So that's a very big focus of mine currently. Also First Nations solidarity work. It's really, important that at this time we are listening to First Nations and seeking to understand and amplify their aspirations for country, because really this is an opportunity for First Nations to assert, their desires of how country can be managed, with the support and in co-management situations potentially with other folk that have the best interest for the environment. But yeah, that's a really fundamental aspect of my work. It's walking with First Nations, and even though sometimes it may be difficult, like it is a fundamental aspect of my work, because social justice and environmental justice are intersectional, and we know that. And the last thing is I've actually taken a bit of a step down from being in such an intense forest direct action kind of mode. When I first kind of connected with Zonta, I was very much so in that world, but it's been over a year now and we've had this really big win. And firstly, there's not a lot of direct action going on, but I don't feel like it's always sustainable to stay in that kind of fight mode. And sometimes it's important to pass the baton to others that you've skilled up and trained and share knowledge with. And it's okay to step into other areas of work that are still tending to those similar issues that we care about. And for me, I've actually taken a more work with this land care network in my local region called the Gecko Clan. So I now am working with over 13 land care groups in my local area to support them in their work. And it's really nice to see how, groups can apply themselves to conservation projects and see the gradual change over time of how they can improve their local environment. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But yeah, thank you so much for having me today and listening. And I'm sure that was a whole bunch of information, so I hope you followed me. If any of you ever want to get in contact regarding my work with Friends of the Earth, that's my email. Or if you have any questions, I believe that we now have a moment for question time. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alana.
Well, that was really impressively, Alana. Absolutely brilliant presentation, and I think we're all in awe of what you have already achieved in your 30s in life and what you have done for the environment and are continuing to do. And as a former bushwalker, I'm very thrilled that you're involved in the Victorian Alps now. So we are going to question time. So either put your questions in the chat and Sandra will acknowledge that, or raise your hand and hopefully we'll see it between a couple of us. So there's lots of information coming in on the chat line at the moment, Alana, about how fantastic your presentation is. But I actually want to start with the first question. So now that Vic Forest has actually been disbanded officially, are the foresters, the logging industry, are they trying to get back in any way, like, saying they've got to burn or something like that, or have they just totally given up?
No, they have not totally given up. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. So right now, Forest Fire Management Victoria has absorbed a lot of contractors from Vic Forest, and I'm not sure if you've seen in the news over the last 4 months, but there's safety works taking place for fuel breaks, and they cut down a whole bunch of massive trees in the Yarra Ranges in the national park there. So there's a real big issue around contractors moving into Forest Fire Management Victoria they don't have the oversight that the logging industry did, even though that was terrible. So it's even more terrible under Forest Fire Management Victoria. And in the last 4 months, my colleagues / friends at Wildlife of the Central Highlands did some surveying in the Yarra Ranges, detected greater gliders living in these massive mountain ash, sent in a report and said you cannot log these trees, and they did it anyway. And then they went back, found a dead greater glider at the base of this massive tree. And that's been all over the news. I can send you an article to do with that if you want to.
That would be great. Yes.
Yes. So Forest Fire Management Victoria is kind of like the new Target. And we also know that planned burns are, they're affecting hollow-bearing species because the smoke smokes them out. And also it's increasing the flammability of forests. So there's some forest groups who have pivoted towards that work, and they're doing that work. And I've been involved in a little bit of campaign work around that. But in terms of like the broad scale clear felling, where they've been, logging 30 plus hectares at a time, that has well and truly ended. And I guess until the government actually puts these new land categories in place, there are still, the door is shut, but the window is open, and
So,
there's, go on.
So I think we'll have to wind up the question. Sorry, I got in that question there and other people haven't.
Right.
But maybe for the other questions, we can actually send them to you to get some answers. We just kind of need to move on now. But Alana, you are an amazing, a really true leader. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I think Carol's going to take us back to the slides now.
Yeah, you can see that. Can you see about the?
Yep.
Just want to quickly mention that.
All right. Okay. So now, so you all got the idea then, I think, that the Women Taking Climate Action Award is actually very significant because it says to young women or women who get the awards that we believe in what they're doing, and that they need that to know that sometimes. So it will become a district award in 2024 this year. It's $1,000 is the award, and it's open to people who identify as a woman and in whatever way, and who are residents of District 23. And the applicants are judged on their innovative actions that engage with women and contribute to climate change innovation. And you can clearly see why Alana has been a winner. So these actions can include mitigation, adaptation, communication, advocacy, and service. So this year we're going to open it on the 1st of September and close on the 21st of October. The application is going out to all District 23 in the newsletter, and it will also go onto the Zonta Says Now website. And I really encourage you to please, if you know people who can apply, get them to do that, because it's really an exciting thing for us to be able to acknowledge these wonderful women. So thank you. I'll hand over to Cheryl now.
Thanks, Sue. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Janet Salisbury. Originally a cancer researcher, she was later moved into science writing and editing. Janet is the founder of the Women's Climate Congress, an organisation she started in January 2020 in response to the Black Summer fires. The WCC promotes women's leadership for united, non-partisan action on climate change. Janet was a finalist in the Women's Agenda Women in Leadership Awards in 2021. Congratulations, Janet. If you are a member of WCC, please let us know in the chat line. The WCC has a popular book club, and also many members would have seen their women's climate conversations online. Today, we hope that Janet will tell us more about the Charter for Change and the wins that WCC has achieved so far.
Over to you, Janet. You're on mute, Janet.
Start again. Sorry. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Cheryl. And I would like to start by just acknowledging that I am joining from Canberra today, and that's the land of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm just in a brief outline, I'm going to tell you a little bit of background about the Women's Climate Congress, and then I'm going to tell you about what we're doing now and actually what we're hoping to be doing over the next couple of years. The Women's Climate Congress, I'll just find out where my thing is, or there. Oh, no, I won't go there yet. Women's Climate Congress was formed in January 2020, but the ideas and inspiration have been brewing in me for some time before this and came from two different parts of my life. First, my work in science communication, which led me to a deep interest in creating dialogue around contentious policy issues. And second, my involvement in the women's climate movement through membership of the Canberra-based group called A Chorus of Women, who bring an artistic voice through song and dramatic presentation to issues of peace, human rights, climate change, and care for the environment. This led me to value the role of the arts in connection to our common humanity. And in relation to the arts, this is a quote from my friend Glenda Clockley from a wonderful dramatic and choral piece that she wrote called The Gifts of the Furies. I'll bring drought and fire under filthy skies. I'll scorch the farmland and torch the forest. I'll raise the ocean, drown the cities, and spare no human being. This is what the Furies of Earth say in this dramatic work by Glenda, which is a modern day prophetic adaptation of Aeschylus's famous play, The Eumenides. You may know that in Greek mythology, the Furies are the most ancient spirits of earth. In female form, they avenge wrongdoing against mothers and earth. In climate terms, this can be thought of as the awesome power of the earth that brings fire and flood and cyclones and tsunamis and other events that are beyond our human power to control. We have been provoking that power for decades by power over destructive behavior towards Mother Earth. Interestingly, the Eumenides is the only Greek tragedy that has a happy ending. Under the guidance of Athena, representing civilized wisdom, the people learn to revere the earth again, and the Furies return to their nurturing Earth Mother form known as the kindly ones. In January 2020, with the Black Summer bushfires raging and choking smoke all around, the Furies seemed awfully real. After more than a decade of bitter debate, our government was divided, seemingly unable to move the policy dial enough to create a nationally agreed plan to address climate risks. Returning the Earth's climate to the kindly ones seemed increasingly unlikely. Encouraged by many of my women friends, I decided it was time for action. I distributed a discussion paper I'd worked on for a while about how women could lead an initiative to bring the polarized political positions together so that we could collaborate to transition our economy and lifestyles to a sustainable, regenerative future before we're overwhelmed by climate change. Another inspiration for my paper and this early thinking was the little-known story of the 1915 International Congress of Women, which was held in The Hague in April 1915 and was the only peace conference. Where is it? Oh, for some reason my picture of the Congress is not showing up there. I don't know where it's disappeared to. Never mind. You'll have to imagine it. And it was the only peace conference in World War I with some 1,300 women delegates from 12 warring and neutral countries. One of the delegates was Julia Grace Wales, then a 33-year-old English scholar at the University of Wisconsin, who had published a plan to end the war called Continuous Mediation Without Armistice. She proposed that, without attributing blame to either side, the neutral nations should form an independent conference to mediate between the warring countries. This was, according to Julia Grace, the natural thing to do. And what a marvelous case study in what was a marvelous case study in Western culture of women speak, these women at the International Congress passed 20 insightful resolutions that adopted Julia Grace's plan to end the war and identified a raft of conditions for establishing a permanent peace. Envoys from the Congress took the plan to some 40 heads of government and other leaders across Europe and the US, the so-called great men, who showed an interest in the most sensible plan, but it was never implemented. The war continued and killed 40 million people. The other resolutions, however, have shaped much of international human rights law over the past 100 years. So on the 20th of January, amidst a scene of shredded trees and smashed cars caused by the massive hailstorm that hit Canberra that day, 32 women arrived at a meeting I called, hoping that women's voices and leadership, collaborating beyond partisan positions, could show the way to address climate change and focus on nurturing life on Earth for future generations. The meeting generated great energy and prompted a second gathering a couple of weeks later. We had answered nature's call, and we formed the Women's Climate Congress as a diverse, non-partisan network of women who cannot stay silent while the unfolding climate emergency threatens the future of our children and all life on Earth. Our vision was to create a stable climate for all of the planet's ecosystems and promote women's leadership to turn the tide of political culture to collaboration and cooperation. In this vision, the nurture of life and care for the Earth are at the centre of every government decision. Can I just ask, are you seeing the slides okay? Yeah, okay. Just that, I don't know what happened to the previous one. It's disconcerting.
Yeah. It's come now, yeah.
Good. Since then, our dedicated team of volunteers has created a national movement of women with over 700 members. We're also linked to thousands of small women through social media and alliances with other national and international organisations. So why women? Why did we think it was so important for women? Well, I mean, I know I'm talking totally to the converted here, and I loved your train analogy and your introduction about the Zonta that says now to climate action. So, but to us too, meeting in January 2020, it seemed that at this moment in history, women's voices are urgently needed to rebalance the centuries-old systems and structures that have been led by men for the past few thousands of years. Our governance systems, policy frameworks, economics, business management, leadership criteria, and much else reflect a male lens, which tends towards hierarchical and combative leadership, technology extraction of resources and survival. Furthermore, the founding fathers of economics placed caring, regeneration, and nurture of life outside of the main policy arena, along with women themselves. And although women are now welcomed and are participating in increasing numbers, they are still fitting into these systems. This is not to say that men are wrong per se, or that women have all the answers, just that things are out of balance. And the World War I case study that I mentioned shows us that women bring to the table, what women can bring to the table, when they work together on their own terms. And we also know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by climate disasters, and it's been shown, I think, in research that about 80% of disaster victims are women and girls. And you've already mentioned that in the introduction earlier. So it seemed timely for a new women's movement to build not just the numbers of women in positions of power, but their access to the policy agenda and authority. The suffrage movement called for votes for women. The women's liberation movement called for equal rights and representation with a focus on numbers. We are talking about a far greater structural rebalance of the systems themselves. Women are done with fitting in and want full autonomy, respect, and safety. So like Julia Grace Wales proposed for ending the war, we need to find a process to work together to develop a national plan for action on climate change. We need to find a way for politicians and aligned groups of citizens who are currently thinking in polarised ways to come together in a national process that could offer the opposing forces an opportunity to stop arguing, listen and collaborate to resolve this very difficult issue together without it having to be a win-lose situation. In Australia, most of us have benefited from the industrial economy, not all of us, I should say, but most of us. So in my discussion paper, I suggested that we need to put our blame for how we got here to one side and work together to secure a safe future for all, and if necessary, to mediate the different perspectives and develop a national plan that meets the scientific criteria for a safe future while looking after those most affected by the changes. So our theory of change is summarised here. I won't go into it all, but essentially we're mobilising a movement of women in all our diversity, empowered to promote women's leadership, policy priorities and solutions. COVID played very much into our hands, actually, sending us onto Zoom and talking to women across the country. We set a goal to try and find members, have members in every electorate. And today we do have women members in most electorates across the country, as well as thousands of other contacts, as I mentioned earlier. And we're also connected to numerous other women in Australia and overseas through collaborations and partnerships, such as this one with Zonta. We've engaged with many prominent women thought leaders and thousands of women through our regular women's climate conversations, which Cheryl mentioned earlier, and our book club and other events and other Remember conversation events. We've also built relationships with First Nations women and listened to impassioned voices of Pacific women. We've met numerous MPs, senators, advisors and other decision makers. We've consistently promoted creation of a cross-party women's parliamentary group where women from all parties can support each other in representing the concerns of women and finding that new balance that we want in our systems. We've developed spaces for cross-party conversations and proposed a mediated stakeholder roundtable process to develop a national plan of action on climate change. Based on the inspiration of the International Congress of Women, we've held a National Congress of Women. COVID initially prevented a face-to-face conference, so we held 2 one-day online events in November 2021 and April 2022, and a 2-day in-person event in Canberra in September 2022. Based on all this work and conversations with women, we gathered our findings, ideas and themes into the WCC Charter for Change. Like the women who came together for the 1915 International Congress and developed resolutions about international human rights and diplomacy that created an agenda for international human rights law reform, we think it's time again for women to set the agenda and for action on climate change and ongoing human and planetary well-being. And like the resolutions from the 1915 International Congress of Women, the WCC Charter addresses 2 different timescales for change to happen. So first of all, this is here showing us the opening statements of the Charter for Change, which actually in their sort of syntax and mode of expression are actually based on what was Resolution 1 from the 1915 International Congress of Women. And it says, "We women of the Women's Climate Congress and others despair that Earth is hurtling towards catastrophic climate change that humanity is failing to mitigate. We grieve the unfolding and potentially irreversible impacts on all current and future life unless immediate and effective action is taken." And then the first 3 resolutions are about immediate actions to secure the climate, which was a bit like in 1915, the women had a resolution to end the war. So And we do think that the gender balanced inclusive governance is right up there as one of the key actions, because as others have said, in relation to climate change and in relation to the other sustainable development goals, unless there is equality for women, these things are not going to come about. So that is right up there as one of the most important immediate actions to secure the climate. And the other actions are about us overall taking collective responsibility so that we can work together. And then we have this proposal for developing an agreed national plan. And then the other actions, and these are sort of, again, inspired by the idea of the Women in 1915 asked for an ongoing sustainable peace. This is actions for long-term human and planetary well-being. And they cover all of the things that when you sit a group of people down to talk about action on climate change, these are all the other things that are intimately interwoven with that. And we've already heard from Alana about upholding the rights of all Earth life and our biodiversity, and then there's a whole range of other issues that are significant, and they're captured by these 8 other actions that we have here. So the charter was finalised after our National Congress in September 2022, and we presented, and in November 2022, we presented it to women parliamentarians at a very kind of creative event that was held in the Members' Hall in Parliament House. We had to get special permission to go there because it's not a public space. And my friends and colleagues from a chorus of women in Canberra came, and we did a sort of an artistic type of presentation, bringing a feminine, I suppose, spirit into that very masculine space. And we presented the charter to women parliamentarians from across all the different parties. So since then, we've been working very hard to take the charter, to promote the charter, both in governance and in local communities. And our key strategic areas of action are shown on this slide, which include continuing to develop our relationships with parliamentarians and decision makers. And in particular, in that area, we have been continuing to promote our central idea of encouraging women in parliaments to work together. And we have had a Women's Roundtable event in the federal parliament. We have relationships with a number of federal women parliamentarians. And we've also been working quite hard with the ACT Legislative Assembly to run women's breakfasts for their women members of the MLAs, members of the Legislative Assembly. And we're hoping that is a model that can be then translated into other state and territory parliaments as well. I think because we are promoting dialogue and non-partisan action, we are seen to be a voice that's quite trusted among parliamentarians, which actually sometimes opens doors for us to try and create spaces for the types of conversations that are not just a protest. We're trying to sort of get beneath the surface to work out how we can have a better community conversation that would actually move the dial towards working together on this incredibly existential problem, so that we don't continually have to sort of live with the adversarial parliamentary system as it is at the moment. So we also have another whole stream of what we call grassroots activities, and that's our online conversations. And we've also been taking our charter into local communities in what we call roadshow events. And we've been to a number of different communities in certainly the south of Australia, a little bit in Western Australia, and we hope to get up to Queensland sometime soon as well. And we run sort of workshops with women in local communities about the charter and about what they're really to empower them to take up the different actions in the charter within their own communities. And we also have a very strong stream in our work of affiliation and collaboration, and that is exactly the sort of thing that we're doing now talking to Zonta, sort of working with other women's organisations. And this is actually part of both a national movement and increasingly active international women's movement towards increased action on climate change and bringing women's voices into representation, including right the way up into the UN Conference of the Parties, or COP meetings. And we're bringing this work together over the next couple of years. We are working very hard both with the mainstream climate movement to promote representation of women and gender inclusive processes to become a central issue, and also with the women's movement. But within the mainstream climate movement, I mean, it is incredible that there is quite a significant blind spot about the issue of women's representation and women's equality per se, as opposed to just there being women in the room taking part in whatever activities have already been part of the climate movement. There's a tendency to say, oh, there's plenty of women here, that we've sort of got this, but without recognizing that it is a gender issue, and that gender equality is an issue in its own right that requires its own discussion and foregrounding in order for women to really be able to bring their own agenda to the table, as I have already been mentioning. So we have been working hard to get women's equality and women's representation onto the agenda within the climate movement, within the broader climate movement. And we're also part of an national and international movement of women whose voices are becoming increasingly strong going up into the United Nations COP process. And we're hoping to continue this work. We are going to continue this work, leading towards what looks like an increasingly probable Australian COP in 2026, which will be not just Australian, actually an Australian and Pacific co-hosted COP, which will be towards the end of 2026. And what we're hoping is that the Women's Climate Congress, in collaboration with other women's organisations, hopefully like Zonta, will be able to host an international women's conference in the lead up to that Australian Pacific COP in 2026 to bring gender right to the centre of the discussions at that time. So that's what we're working on at the moment, and I might leave it there and see if there are any questions. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Janet, for the introduction to the Women's Climate Congress. It was so fascinating of the work that you're doing. Now is your opportunity to question Janet. What would you like to know more about? And what are your main take-home messages from the audience? And please share them in the chat line, or use your hand to use the hand tool. I'll keep track of the chat lines because Sandra Burns has had to go. Has anyone got any questions? Bridget.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for that, Janet. Just quickly, we've just established a Zonta Australia, and so if you don't mind, I was going to put that last slide you had up there just on the LinkedIn to highlight your work, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure, yes.
And particularly the 4 areas of focus, I think we'll highlight those, but at some point I'm going to write to you and we might have just a deeper discussion about how Zonta Australia just generally we might work together. Carol's got it all in hand, but this probably just adds another dimension to the whole advocacy partnership approach.
Thank you. I noticed somebody put out, how do you join? And you can A, find out much more about the Women's Climate Congress, B, join us, and also see more details about our programme of actions on our website, which is www.womensclimatecongress.com. So it's quite an easy website to
Perfect.
and I think all of it, and you can also read the whole charter. I mean, I had to sort of go over it quite quickly there, but there's a sort of a whole area within the website about the charter, and you can read both the abbreviated flyer and the whole more detailed booklet with all the details of the charter in there. So
Wonderful. And you mentioned a summit in 25 or 26?
Or 26. Well, that's what we're sort of hoping, that there could be some sort of an international Congress of Women in that year. And it now is looking increasingly likely that the Australia will co-host the COP with the Pacific that year. It'll be COP 31.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be marvelous if we can have an international gathering of women in the lead up to that, to really bring a really strong women's agenda, I suppose, to that COP. So that's what we're working with a couple of other international women's organizations who are wanting to do, a part of this international movement that I mentioned, and who we hope will collaborate on that.
But Janet, just, how with the budget process with governments and that, there's a gendered lens that's put over it.
Yeah.
Are you thinking that there would be something like that over the COP agenda more broadly, or the outcomes from that? Or are you seeing that your summit as a piece of work that would feed into the broader COP arrangement?
Well, both in some ways, because I think a piece of work that would feed into the COP, and that's the sort of work we're doing now already through the Charter. And the Charter has a bit of an Australian lens, but very similar actions would apply internationally as well, to bring a women's agenda, I suppose, and women's solutions, because a lot is said about how climate change is really important for women because of women being disproportionately impacted by climate change. But in actual fact, women also are the great bringers of solutions as well. And we want to emphasize that for women to be really heard, right? Because even though there are many women in Parliament and in other positions of power, the general policy agenda is still very male oriented, because it's still based on historically patriarchal systems, our systems of economics and technology and so on. And we want to bring a women's lens to that, a women's perspective, a women's agenda, and to really bring this to the foreground. And it is around caring and nurture of life, and care for the environment, and to bring those things. So those things are the primary things that are discussed, rather than the economy, which always seems to be the first line of discussion at the moment. Not to say that it isn't important to have an economy, but these things can be rebalanced and reshaped.
Yes. Good. I'll look forward to either, if we can help in any way, and I'm sure Carol's already thinking of this, and how it unfolds over the next year or two, because it'll be a heck of a lot of work.
Yes, so we're sort of making tentative steps at the moment.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
I think that members would be really interested in your book club. I know that the book at the moment is, what was it? How to Save the Planet Without the Bullshit or something. And I've been reading that book, and it's really interesting, because if you're in a book club, it makes you read books that you may not ordinarily read. And I'm looking forward to the conversation that comes from the books themselves. And so that's something which, it's free to join, isn't it? The Women's Climate Congress. There's no cost. And it's a great way through the tools you have available with not only your climate conversations, but your book clubs. Those are both things that Zontans could really embrace. It's a very easy way of getting to know more about the WCC.
That's right. Well, thanks for reminding me. We'll make sure we extend some information about that to you, so that Zonta members can join up. That would be great.
It's only a couple of days' time. That's great. But thank you so much, Janet. That's been good. Back to you, Cheryl.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you very much, Janet. And it's a good reminder that our liaisons and connections are very, very important to actually push these large ideas out and get this conversation happening with as many people as possible. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's been very enlightening, and it's great to know all the work's being done that you're doing. And I'll now hand it over to Carol to tell us what we can look forward to in this biennium.
Okay, well, we've got a busy year ahead. The international working group's been busy behind the scenes preparing for the biennium. As you all know, Zonta Says Now is our international campaign for climate justice. And climate justice means that we put gender equity and human rights at the core of decision-making and action on climate. And the Zonta Says Now International Working Group was set up to implement the recommendations in Zonta's statement on climate change. And these basically call on governments and members to take action around meeting obligations under the Paris Agreement and increasing awareness of climate justice, educating girls and encouraging them to pursue STEM careers and contribute to the global response to climate change, involving more women in decision-making, so we've got gender balance in governing bodies on environmental sustainability, and also enabling equal economic opportunities by addressing gender gaps in childcare, elder care, pay, basically anything that's a barrier to women's full and equal participation in the economy, and including women in disaster preparedness and planning so their health and safety needs are met. So we've got our toolkit, which is always growing. We've got our international and Australian websites. We've got the Intercontinental Think Tank, as well as the other national think tanks around the world in Australia, USA, and more coming online. We provide messages for social media that can be used by Zonta International or by clubs, so it meets both ways. Our visual art gallery is where we share how we feel about climate change, and each year we launch a new crop of entries on Earth Day on the 22nd of April. And we're also guided by the 5 steps in our framework for action. And we've developed action guides and how-to leaflets to support members to take climate action. And this biennium, we're really focusing on women's full and equal participation in the economy and their inclusion in decision-making on environmental sustainability. Those are our two areas. Our activities for this biennium, our think tanks is where we learn, share ideas and inspire action. And you can subscribe to our mailing lists via the Zonta Says Now website. The Intercontinental Think Tank meets in odd-numbered months, rotating through 3 time zones, suitable for North, South America, Africa and Europe, and Asia, Oceania. And the Australian think tank meets on the 2nd Saturday of even-numbered months going forward. And the Zonta Says Now develops resources around our 2 key themes for the biennium that go with the resources we developed last biennium on raising awareness and disaster preparedness. And we use our resources to raise awareness of Zonta Says Now during the 3 key events: International Women's Day, Rose Day on the 8th of March, CSW between the 10th to 21st of March, and we're going to do an in-person event at that in New York, and also Earth Day, 22nd of April, when we launch the art gallery each year. And we're also going to be providing sort of social media support to the Zonta Says No to Violence Against Women campaign around the International Day of the Girl Child in October and the 16 Days of Activism in November, December. And this biennium, Zonta is emphasising advocacy. And so we're all working closely with our advocacy teams at all levels of Zonta, clubs, areas, district, national groups, and all of our international advocates through the committees of the UN, Council of Europe, African Union, UN Environment Programme, CSW. So we're trying to get to reach all parts, reach anyone we can. So I really want to let you know about the Summit of the Future, the UN Summit of the Future, which is coming up in the 20th, at the end of September. And the aim of this is to turbocharge actions so we can get the Sustainable Development Goals back on track for full implementation by 2030. And the summit will produce a pact for the future based around 5 chapters listed on the screen, with all of the chapters addressing human rights, gender and sustainable development. There will also be a declaration on future generations and a global digital compact that will work towards intergenerational justice and protecting human rights online, among other things. So ideally, Zonta's advocacy should align with the information in the Pact of the Future when it comes out. So check it out online. The other thing is, it was so sad to see the Senate Committee on the Environment and Communications legislation knock back the Climate Change Amendment Duty of Care and Intergenerational Climate Equity Bill that we all know more simply as the Duty of Care Bill. The committee, I went and read the recommendations the other day. The committee felt the bill would not meet its stated aim and recommended that the Australian government utilise the Australian Human Rights Commission's Child Rights Impact Assessment tool when developing policies and making decisions. Sadly, a tool does not have the teeth of legislation, so let's see what happens next. It'll be interesting to see if the class action being taken by the Torres Strait Islanders that we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting will influence government policy and accelerate action to reduce fossil fuels. Well, here are a few headlines that tell the story of the last few weeks. Ocean temperatures on the Great Barrier Reef are the highest in 400 years. Heat killed 50,000 people in Europe last year. Heat's impacting how Aussie children will learn, play and sleep in the future. And meanwhile, we continue to expand our fossil fuel projects. A UNICEF report shows the lives of children are being shortened and altered by climate crisis. This came out a couple of weeks ago. And the Doctors for the Environment Australia show that we must quit coal, oil and gas as they are killing more people than smoking. So have a look at the reports that they're all new ones. Now, Bridget's just put her hand up. I've just noticed that. So have a look at the reports. Bridget, did you have something that you wanted to say?
The good news for the day is that the CBA have stopped lending to big businesses who are connected to the fossil fuel industry. So they've made a positive statement that I read this morning somewhere. So I thought in all of that sad news, there is one positive story.
That's great. I'm really pleased to hear it. That's really good. But it just keeps us on our toes, you know, that we have got a huge challenge ahead of us, and we've got future generations resting on what we do today. So just, you know, you can't be asleep at the wheel. And our next meeting is on Saturday, the 12th of October at 1 p.m. And I've put here, we hope to have Anjali Sharma. She confirmed yesterday that she will be able to speak to us. So that is absolutely super. Some of you may not know who Anjali is. There was a court case taken by, was it 12, 13 young people against the Minister for the Environment, against the expansion of a coal mine, saying that the expansion will have a negative impact on their health in the future. Through that case, the courts in Australia no longer question the climate science. And what happened was, while the judge agreed with them that the minister did have a duty of care, on appeal, it was knocked back because they said the minister her portfolio did not cover that. There was no requirement for her to think about climate change in any of her decisions. Anyway, Anjali was not put off by this. She went door knocking and teamed up with David Pocock, and they put forward that duty of care bill. And so she thought, well, we can't change it through the courts, we'll change it through law. And they tried to get the law changed. So it would be really interesting to hear Anjali's story next in October. So that was a really great news. Anyway, it's been a busy meeting, and many thanks to Alana for taking us up in the trees on those amazing cables. I don't know how on earth she does it, pulling us up those trees. It's frightening. And Janet, for all the work that you've been doing with having all those dialogues around Australia and having the persistence just to keep going, because I know how hard it can be to keep the movement going, keep the conversations going. And I just love the work that you're doing with building those conversations with the parliamentarians. I think that is really great, building all those relationships, and especially the work that you're hoping to do with the COP in the future. You know, I'm sure that we'd love to have more conversations about that and to see what we can do to help. I want to thank everyone today for the meetings. Sandra Burns was in the middle of a breast cushion workshop with the Rover Scouts, and so she had to leave in the middle of this meeting. We also had great input from Sue and from Cheryl and from Christine. And I just want to thank you, everyone that's participated today, for making this such an interesting meeting. So until our next meeting, keep breathing, keep smiling and have fun, and bye for now.